What's going on, everybody? Moonshine here. Hope you've had a good week. Hopefully, heading out into having a good weekend. It's been a fun one this week for me at my job. It is just post Valentine's Day, which is the single largest, busiest day of the year for us. Without getting into the details of what I do, it's busy. It ranks up there with Halloween. It's Halloween's a little bit more hectic. We do a lot more crazy people, but Valentine's Day is another big one for us. So glad to have that over with. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. But anyhow, uh, don't have a lot of wrestling stuff to share with you as of late. I mean, there's been some wrestling news and notes, stuff like that. I get into that another time. The only thing I can think of note is that there's a '80s wrestler by the name of Billy Jack Haynes allegedly murdered his wife. That's wonderful, but he's an old guy. He's got serious brain damage. He was brain damaged before that, so I don't know. It's sad, just another sad situation. But as far as with me, I don't know if anybody followed any of the posts that I do or not, but actually sent out a bunch of my early matches to the Legacy Box, which is a company that digitizes old VHS tapes, VHS-C, Betamax, cassette, stuff like that. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks or so, I'm going to have some of my old matches posted up. And the idea is that if I can figure out this whole internet thing, I'm going to try and get a couple of my opponents to do like not so much a live stream, but maybe a video where we sit and we watch along and maybe critique the matches, talk about them, that sort of thing. And even though we're all nobodies and nobody's really heard of us other than probably like a few dozen people who remember us from back in the day, I figured it'd be kind of fun. So that's something I got cooked up in the future. But for now, I just figured I'd do another showcasing of some of my favorite movies. Some people seem to like that. Had a had a few comments on it, which is cool. I guess I'll do that whole thing. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good shit. It just is what it is. Keeps these things growing, which is something I like to do. I like talking about all this stuff. So anyhow, without babbling too much, let's get into it. First one I have here is from 1990, Clive Barker's Nightbreed. It was written and directed by Clive Barker, based on his short story Cabal. I'm sure if you watch this channel, you're familiar with it. Uh, it's got Craig Schieffer. He plays Aaron Boone, who's a guy he has nightmares, visions of a place called Midian, and he's led to believe by a psychiatrist who's played by David Cronenberg, who's a famous director, did The Fly, Rabid. I want to say Shivers. He leads him to believe that he's a serial killer, but the big plot twist is that Cronenberg himself is the serial killer, and he pins it on Boone. Uh, he ends up getting murdered by the police, and one thing leads to another, and he actually finds Midian, and he gets to live amongst the monsters, and then eventually Cronenberg wants to destroy him and the monsters, and it kind of goes from there. It's a fantastic movie, great production, special effects. This one's actually the director's cut. There's three versions out of this movie: the theatrical release, the director's cut, which has a lot more footage in it, and then the one I think it's called Midian, or it might be called the Cabal cut. That one, I've never really seen that one. I guess it's got maybe a little bit more, but this one seemed like the best version to get. I know that Scream Factory put out another version of it. I didn't get it. I mean, I kind of missed the boat on that one. I would have liked to have had the poster to it, but what are you gonna do? So if you've never seen that, Nightbreed's a killer movie. I definitely recommend it. Next one up is we're gonna do a couple. Yeah, Hammer Horror, The Devil Rides Out. This one's a tremendous movie. It stars Christopher Lee and a gentleman by the name of Charles Gray, who, everyone probably knows who Christopher Lee is if you follow horror movies. And Charles Gray, he was a British actor back in the day, and he's really good in this. He plays a cult leader. Christopher Lee plays a guy who he stumbles upon this occultist group. He's looking in on a friend of his son, and he realizes that he's got mixed up with a cult. tries to get him out of it, and one thing leads to another, and the cult leader tries to pull him back in, and then all the events that lead from one point to another. And it's really cool. It's got a lot of good effects for the time. I mean, it was from the '60s, from 1968. Uh, but it's another killer movie. I always remember watching this when I was a kid. It would come on TV around Halloween, and it just always stuck with me. So I really enjoy this one. So The Devil's Rides Out is another one to check out. Next up is from 1972 and 1973 is a couple of Amicus horror films. These are tremendous. Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Both of these are killer. Another pair of movies that when I was a kid they would play on TV and around Halloween time, and they're always fun to watch. You know, they're not too gory for the time, but you know it's early '70s, so it's not like some of the splatter gore stuff. It's not like Terrifier or anything like that. So it's definitely a lot more palatable. I would say if somebody were to do like you knew someone who didn't like horror movies, then this is probably an entry level thing for them. If they're looking to get into horror movies, I'd probably recommend these. They're really good. As far as the Tales from the Crypt, they're both anthology horror series. They have a series of short films in them, and probably my favorite from Tales from the Crypt is going to be. I took notes. Excuse me for a second. The one with Patrick McGee, who is famously in the Clockwork Orange. He gets the crap kicked out of him by the Droogs, and ends up I think he ends up getting paralyzed from it. But he plays a blind man in one of the films, and this colonel or captain, military guy, takes over this old age home, this assisted living facility, and he just makes life miserable for the people. He tries to make it too militant, militaristic, and he doesn't really treat them well. And one of the guys ends up dying of frostbite because the heat costs too much, according to the captain, the army guy. So he ends up dying. The other guys in the home get really pissed, so they set things up in a manner to where they get their revenge on him. And that's probably the best one. The whole thing's good, but that's my favorite. And then from Vault of Horror, my favorite is the one. It's called The Neat Job, which is kind of a pun if you as far as the end of the film goes. It stars was Terry Thomas, who he's a very funny character actor from England, from back in the day. He was in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which is a fantastic movie if you like comedy. It's kind of like a really, really good old school from the '60s movie. It had pretty much everybody who was a star back then was in that movie, and it's bonkers and it's really fun. It's one of those movies I watch occasionally. I don't actually have it, but it's one of those ones I enjoy watching. Uh, but he plays this really OCD neat freak, and his wife is she's not a slob, but she's clumsy, and she's just kind of like very easygoing, and she screws up his perfect existence, and it spirals from there, and then eventually takes a horrific turn. So it's very funny, as far as macabre gallows humor goes. That's another one I'd recommend. Those two there, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. I'm sure most of you have seen this already or seen both of them already, but if you haven't, check them out. They're awesome. Next up, this one is fantastic. This is Vice Squad from 1982. It stars Wings Hauser, who was he was kind of a perennial B movie star back in the '80s, and Susan Hubley, who was in Escape from New York with Kurt Russell, and she plays a prostitute named Princess, who she turns Wings Hauser's character Ramrod. Just fantastic, fantastic name. Uh, she turns him in because he ends up killing her friend Ginger. He beats her to death with a coat hanger and does awful, horrific things to her with the coat hanger. Ginger's actually Nina Blackwood, who was an MTV VJ, like one of the OG MTV VJs. She was one of those. And she's in this movie and she dies in it. So she ends up going to the cops. The Vice Squad turns him in. They arrest him. They set him up in a sting operation. They arrest him, and then the two worst police in the history of movie cops, they end up losing him while they got him in custody, and he just goes on this over the top cartoonish rampage throughout Los Angeles, trying to find Princess, and it's top notch. It's just such a great, like, this is the type of stuff that I've really enjoyed. Just this B movie, like schlock, just terrible. It's like you shouldn't like it. It's kind of falls into that so bad it's good category of movies. But this one, if you've never seen it, it's top notch. I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes movies, likes over the top B films, especially ones from the 80s, late 70s, early 90s, stuff like that. It's killer. It's another one that I definitely recommend to anybody who likes movies. And yeah, so that's that one, Vice Squad. Pick it up if you don't have it already. And actually, a little aside here, a lot of these are from Scream and Shout Factory. That they're a killer source of picking stuff up. I know most of you probably already know that, but if you don't, that's a good place to go pick movies up. So anyhow, moving along here. The next one is another just ridiculous, over the top movie. This one's called Deadly Prey. It's from 1987. It's written and directed by a gentleman named David A. Pryor. He made a ton of awful B movies, almost like C grade movies in the 80s. And this is probably like top of the list. The next one is probably Deadliest Prey, which is hilarious because it's basically the same movie over again, but all the characters are in it are older. And he just does the same exact movie over again. It's ridiculous. But this one's basically like almost it's a man hunting man as far as being the deadliest prey on the planet. The main character, the actor's name is Ted Pryor. He's the guy he plays like a special forces Rambo type of guy. They abduct him out of his home, and they use him to play like a cat and mouse game with this mercenary group, and it's supposed to get them battle tested and ready for whatever mercenary acts, wherever they're going to be sent out by whatever crazy shadow outfit that's out there. But he turns out to be this total badass, and he just goes on this rampage, like slowly but surely picking all these people off one by one, and so on and so forth. But it's so bad, so poorly shot. The music in it is ridiculous. They have this dun 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 throughout the entire movie every time something dramatic happens, but it's great. It's one of these just tremendous awful movies that I love watching, and I've watched it many 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 times and found it on Blu-ray, which is tremendous. So again, Deadly Prey. If you've never seen this, check it out. It's definitely worth the watch. And finally, as far as my sleeper, this one I don't even have it on DVD, but this one, if you've ever seen The Adventures of Ford Fairlane with Andrew Dice Clay, it's the one and only time that they let him star in a movie. And I know some of you probably know he's been in a bunch of movies and TV and all that. But if you don't know, Andrew Dice Clay was a famous comedian from the 80s. He was the first person, as far as a stand-up comic, to sell out Madison Square Garden, and that was like a huge thing. People do it a lot all the time nowadays, like Bill Burr, Louis C.K., people like that, and Kevin Hart. They all sell arenas and stadiums out like that. Back when Dice did it, it was unheard of. So he was huge back then, and this was the first time they've really let him star in a movie, and it never happened again. I was kind of gone a tangent here. It's funny because I think it was him and probably Weird Al, and I'm trying to think of one other person who was the one, Tom Green, or probably those are people who Hollywood let them make one movie. And that was it. But this one's great. It's got he plays a private detective named Ford Fairlane. He's set out on a mission by this DJ, played by Gilbert Gottfried, Johnny something or other. I can't think of his last name right now. Forgive me, but he's a shock jock, and he sends him out to go find his daughter, who turns out to not be his daughter, and then he gets killed in the process. And then the next character in the movie is played by Priscilla Presley. He wants Fairlane to go. She wants Ford Fairlane to go find her daughter, and it turns out to be the same person. And it just turns into this whole thing where he's trying to find this Zuzu pedals. And I can't remember the name of the actress. She was in a lot of movies in the '80s, a lot of like support cast roles, but very familiar face if you watch enough movies like I do. And then it turns out that he finds her, and he finds all these discs throughout the course of the movie, and they're all tied together. Some money laundering scheme. The villain of the movie is Wayne Newton, which is crazy. It's just bonkers that that's the guy who they came up with to be the villain of the film. At the end of it, he gives the typical villain monologue. It's just hilarious. He goes on this whole thing about how he set out and I set out in this industry to make it so sleazy and so corrupt. I am pissed in the punch bowl, and at this record release party, all these people are drinking the punch. They just do a spit take and just it's wonderful, but it's full of Andrew Dice Clay's humor. And if you're not a fan, you probably won't enjoy it. But I enjoy it. I love humor like that, and I love like kind of like naughty humor, I guess you could say. But he's great, and it's a fantastic movie. Another one. I know I use the words fantastic and killer a lot, but I can't emphasize enough how good these movies are. But yeah, that's that. If you want to leave a comment, feel free. If you enjoy the video, if you see if there's anything else you want to point out as far as movies or anything like that, that you'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember that," or "Oh, that's a cool one," or mention other ones that you think I might not have seen. Yeah, just let me know. But until the next time, that's all I got for you. All right. So I hope everybody has a good weekend, has a good week next week, and good month, year, all that good happy horse shit. But anyhow, I'll talk with you soon. Later.